Hello, I'm Major Retired André Thivierge, and I am the co-chair of the Ottawa Veterans Task Force, and I'm happy to bring you this initiative in partnership with the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Ottawa. In today's episode, we will explore the vast ecosystem of resources available to support veterans, their families, and the physicians who care for them. We will highlight the Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence for Canadian Veterans, the Sexual Misconduct Response Centre, as well as the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families. We want to ensure that you understand that you're not alone in your journey of helping your veteran patients. Thank you very much and enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Brent Wolfrom. I am a family physician in Kingston, Ontario. I'm a veteran myself and program director for the postgraduate training program at Queen's University.
Hi, my name is Dr. Marcus Besemann. I'm the outgoing Chief of Rehabilitation Medicine for the Canadian Armed Forces and soon to be owner-operator of Beechwood Physical Medicine Clinic, operating mostly for veterans musculoskeletal care.
Hi again, Marcus. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you again. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, thank you. Marcus, can you just describe the role of the Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence for Canadian Veterans and how many clinics exist across the country?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number of clinics, but the Centre of Excellence was created, I believe, 3-4 years ago by a big grant from Veterans Affairs Canada when they realized that pain at large in Canada, as we know, is a difficult beast to manage. And for veterans in particular, there are complexities that went beyond most clinicians' abilities to carry out. So it was established at the William G. de Groot Chronic Pain Management Facility at Hamilton, part of McMaster University, and is headed by Dr. Ramesh Zacharias. They have a research component and a clinical component. And there are at least a dozen signatories, if I understand correctly, of hubs that are across the country that utilize the hub and spoke model, much like ECHO Ontario for chronic pain management, where the hub does all the coordinating, education, and essentially evidence-based practice guidelines production for the spokes, and then the spokes deliver the care.
You mentioned some of the complexity around chronic pain management, which certainly I think most physicians would agree with. What sorts of supports would the Chronic Pain Centre of Excellence for Canadian Veterans be able to offer to physicians?
Yeah, so as far as the physician component goes, we know that education in chronic pain management can never be enough. It seems like we're always thirsting for more on that front. The generation of resource material and access to resources, and whether it's bringing a patient into the Centre of Excellence itself or to recommend the care facility nearby, I think those would be the three pillars. So education, provision of tools and guidelines, and then actual clinical care delivery to those patients that family physicians might be struggling with.
And you mentioned a hub and spoke model earlier. Can you describe how the relationship works between the Centre of Excellence and clinics that are actually providing the pain management care?
Yeah, so all this is in constant evolution. I had the privilege to attend I believe it was the third annual conference of the Centre of Excellence in Montreal this past fall. What really impressed me most, Brent, is, they put their money where their mouth is, in that they said they would put veterans first. And I would say half of the talks at that meeting were given by veterans, which I'm a big fan of, because I think we underutilize the fact that the people we're treating probably actually hold many of the answers that we as clinicians are struggling with. And so that was the first thing. They say their model is based on hope. And I saw a lot of hope being generated, not false hope and false promises, but true hope. And so as a result, the inspiration that came out of that for the clinicians on those various spokes, I think it was palpable. And the connection that happened between the veterans themselves and the clinicians and the dialogue, I think, was more fruitful than any conference I've attended on the subject, where it's usually either the researchers, the clinicians, or the patient advocacy groups that are sitting alone in their rooms about what's not working.
Love the holistic approach. That's wonderful. And just shifting gears a little bit, can you talk a little bit about the nature of research that's being done at the Centre of Excellence and any findings that you think would be noteworthy?
Yeah. So there's a number of very eminent researchers, one of whom is a good friend of mine as well, Jason Buse, is a chiropractor, actually, who heads a lot of the research at the Center of Excellence, and they've done multiple levels of research, which what intrigues me most is everything from yoga and mindfulness. As we know, these are practices that have been around for millennia that we're somehow rediscovering as tools to appease human suffering, which is clearly a big component of the chronic pain dilemma. It's not just the pain, it's the suffering that it generates. So, whether it's acupuncture, manual therapies, massage, yoga, exercise, Tai Chi, mindfulness, they're very open to exploring the evidence base for those things. The second component is, cannabis is a big issue in veterans. And what was lacking so far, I think, in the research regarding cannabis was actually the input from the veterans themselves. Because clearly we as physicians can say, well, there's no evidence or there's lacking evidence. And if the patient comes to you and says, but doc, it's the only thing that works for me, then there's a disconnect. And I think they've managed to bridge that disconnect in that they've designed studies where veterans' input was first and foremost, not that it skewed the validity of the science, but I think it only enriched it in that, yes, we still know that cannabis helps some people some of the time, and it's not a great drug for a lot of people, but it is a lifesaver for some, and they managed to mine down to more depth as to what that population might be. And so I really commend them for that aspect of their research.
Putting on my family physician hat and thinking about sitting in a busy practice with a veteran who's experiencing chronic pain that I need some help managing, how would I access the information and resources available through the center?
So for one, get yourself logged on to their website. And as a clinician, you can get on their send out list. So you'll get all the information and conferences and meetings that they're holding. So that would be number one. Number two, don't hesitate to reach out. The portal is phenomenally rapid at answering questions. They've actually employed a number of veterans, Paul Roos being one of them, a veteran, and I hope I'm not transgressing any boundaries, but surprise, who suffers from chronic pain, who was hired at the Center of Excellence, who understands intimately what these veterans are going through, what the release process entails, and that identity shift that occurs at the time of shifting from being a serving member until you release. And so they've been very, very quick at answering my calls and triaging to where that call needs to go to get the answer you're looking for. So don't hesitate to reach out. I think as physicians, we're so busy ourselves and we're accustomed to kind of forging our path alone because we expect not to get answers when we call out for help. And I think this is one center that delivers on the promise that they will answer. And if the answer is, I don't think we can do any more, I think that's a valid answer. And I think that's often what our veterans are expecting. Just tell me if this is the end of the road and this is as good as it gets. Just be honest with me and tell me that that's the case, but don't keep firing me out to different consultants with the false hope that somehow someone out there has got the magic bullet.
Thanks, Marcus. I think certainly for many physicians, we probably share the same perspective of just simply wanting to know when we've done what we can do. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like physicians out in the community with veteran patients to know about chronic pain or the center?
Yeah, just something that came up as close as yesterday. So I sit on the Canadian Pain Task Force, which is an amalgamation of basically all federal institutions that have something to do with pain, which, surprise, surprise, is almost all of them, right? And we don't have to go through the lists. But one of the most prophetic little tidbits, what is at a conference, you'll often come out with one little tidbit, that little 5-second blurb that kind of changes the way you look at things. One of the psychologists from the Ottawa Pain Clinic who was talking about a really horrific total pain syndrome, patient that was hospitalized, someone with substance use disorder, had severe mental and physical health issues, basically had free access, as far as I can understand it, to the fentanyl pump and was basically pressing that button nonstop. The intervention that helped most was actually a 15-minute intervention by, I believe it was a social worker who actually sat at the side of the bed. We know from William Osler and from all the studies that if you actually take the time to sit with a patient, it doesn't necessarily mean physically sit with them, but show them the time of day. 15 minutes might be all it takes. And they had an honest discussion as to what was really hurting and opened it into the spiritual realm. So if you ask me what has shifted in this whole pain management dynamic, I think we went from a purely biological model to then the biopsychological model to the biopsychosocial model. And now we're venturing into the biopsychosocial spiritual model. And without getting too touchy-feely, this is where a lot of the answers in my patients seem to lie, is that existential question. And we as physicians aren't trained necessarily as philosophers or doctors of divinity, and yet the answers often come from those realms. And so this young man was then connected with a retreat center that offered meditation and mindfulness. And from then on, he took this incredible path of, for lack of a better word, and I don't want to sound trite, saying seeing the light. You know, he met the love of his life at the center, shifted gears completely, got off all substances, basically found the meaning to his life. And it's probably not the case that all his pain disappeared, because I think the quest for annihilating someone's pain is an exercise in futility, as we all know. And in fact, as they often say, the search for something gets in the way of finding it. And if you can just step back like that social worker did and sit at the bedside, without talking about Patch Adams, but Robin Williams, I'm a big fan of. And there's one scene I think that we should all look at over and over again. It's when he's dealing with a psychotic patient. And what calms the situation is when Robin Williams says, "I'm scared too." And I think as clinicians, if we say honestly, look, I'm scared too, because I've done all this training and I really don't know what to do tangibly for you anymore. And nor do I think many of my colleagues do, but can we have an honest talk about what's really bothering you? And it's amazing what comes out. And it might not end in 15 minutes, but you can rebook follow-up appointments what that discussion gets opened up, right? So I would just leave it at that. I think maybe I'm getting old and thinking that as we near the proverbial grave, that we're getting more spiritual by necessity. But I think our patients are forcing us into that realm, and soldiers especially, because they've seen that razor sharp edge many times on the battlefield. And chronic pain is not that different from the battlefield.
Thanks, Marcus. That's a very powerful story, and a strong reminder that there's so much more to suffering and well-being than nociceptors. Reminds me of that old saying that there are no atheists in a foxhole. Yes. And I think you're touching on some of that as well. As you know, the proverbial saying goes, I think veterans can lead the charge, so to speak, and change the landscape of chronic pain management across the country, which is clearly in a lot of need. And I saw that firsthand when we had our amputees come back to rehab centers. They were showing our civilian amputees how it's done. And for better or worse, they were an inspiration for many to achieve things that they could have never dreamt possible had it not been for the horrors of Afghanistan, right? So at the end of the day, again, I think it's being able to hold those two completely divergent thoughts, is that pain is a really wicked mistress. There's no way about saying that any differently, but it also holds with it incredible wisdom that if we can mine it, if we can tap into it, can shift the life course, not I'd say completely to where it's going, because I think it might shift it exactly to where it needs to be. I think everyone is changing the world one little piece at a time, right? And I think that's all any of us can really do. It is really inspiring to see how some of these people who have suffered so much have carried on, and it's very humbling.
I'm MaryAnn Notarianni. I'm the Deputy CEO and Vice President Knowledge Mobilization with the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families. So in this role, I oversee our knowledge mobilization, implementation, and stakeholder engagement portfolios. I've been with Atlas since 2020. And as part of my background, I've worked in similar types of mental health intermediary organizations at the provincial and national levels. And I've been very motivated by working to ensure that we can support best quality care for people's mental health and well-being, and feel very honored to be working with veterans and families through Atlas Institute.
Hi, MaryAnn. Thanks for joining us. Could you explain to me what the role of Atlas is?
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Wolfrom. And absolutely, Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families, formerly known as the Center of Excellence on PTSD, is set up as an intermediary organization. So we don't provide direct services, but we work to fill gaps in research and also fill gaps between research and practice related to Canadian Armed Forces and RCMP veterans and their families' mental health and well-being. So we do this essentially through 4 functions. Research, that is advancing new knowledge by conducting primary and secondary research directly and with partners from around the globe. Also mobilizing knowledge, that is integrating knowledge from research, practice and lived experience, and putting that into formats that are digestible and accessible to audiences who can use it to improve well-being of veterans and families, including physicians, healthcare providers, and veterans and families themselves, and also through coaching and training, which is to support the uptake and implementation of evidence-based practices amongst service providers through trainings, learning offerings, consultations, and implementation coaching supports. And lastly, through convening, so by bringing people and organizations together to share information and develop collaborative solutions.
In a practical sense, what sorts of supports does Atlas provide to care providers, including family physicians?
We provide a number of supports and trainings to care providers that would be inclusive of physicians as well. So, for example, we provide training for service providers across a range of professional roles and at different levels of the care continuum. We've already organized trainings in cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure therapy. We're providing access to training to raise awareness about working with trauma-exposed professionals, and that's done through a partnership with Wounded Warriors. We have an upcoming training for French prolonged exposure therapy and also cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy that's in the works to take place before the end of March. We also develop informational and educational resources. So we work in consultation with stakeholder advisory committees to develop resources for various service providers, and this would be inclusive of physicians. And these would be on a number of topics. We've been developing resources on military sexual trauma, for example, including fact sheets on coping and healing and the role of peer support. And these are fact sheets that physicians could share with their clients as relevant, clients and patients. We're also planning for resources on military culture, building on and complementing existing material that's out there in that regard. We're also in the final stages of developing a pilot of a consultation service, which is designed to provide one-to-one time-limited consultations for licensed registered mental health service providers. And this will link them with mental health experts on a variety of topics regarding care for veterans and veteran families. So it's actually modeled off of a similar service that's coming out of the U.S. National Center for PTSD, and we anticipate this launching in early 2023. So those are some examples. I would also say that Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families, since part of our mandate is to make evidence and information more accessible to veterans and families themselves, we have a lot of resources on our website, atlasveterans.ca, and we're continuing to add and grow that website. So for physicians, this could be a great resource to offer to veterans and veteran families who are patients if they are looking for fact sheets, videos, things that might explain some, mental health conditions or otherwise. We have that information on our website, and I think that could be a resource for physicians.
And we heard a little bit about operational stress injuries from Dr. Zhang. Is that the focus of Atlas, or does Atlas focus on mental health concerns beyond operational stress injuries?
Well, that's a great question. Our mandate is broad around mental health and well-being. So certainly operational stress injuries, which really is, you probably would have heard a non-medical term that describes persistent psychological difficulties resulting from duties performed, while in service. So that's a part of what we might be looking at. We do work, both research and providing, resources that cover topics related to operational stress injuries, related to specific mental health conditions, related to other experiences that could have an impact on veteran family mental health and well-being, including, moral injury, traumatic brain injury, talking about sleep and resilience and well-being. So these are a number of the topics that we look at. So I wouldn't say it's specifically just about an OSI, but broadly veteran family mental health.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And you alluded to working with some other community organizations. Can you give me a sense of how Atlas is connecting with the community and partnering with the community?
Absolutely. We connect with the community in a number of ways. So firstly, Atlas Institute does function as a network of networks, as we call it. So this is made up of community-based reference groups and advisory committee that provide us strategic guidance and advice. And this reflects perspectives of CAF and RCMP veterans, veteran families, healthcare providers of, numerous professional backgrounds, and also researchers that are working in this space. And in addition to those groups that are really at the kind of core of our network, we are either leading or participating in or connected with a number of communities of practice and various network so that we can keep apprised of the different knowledge needs of our stakeholder communities, and those include healthcare providers, and that would be inclusive of physicians as well. So through our work, we are regularly looking for opportunities to consult, to understand what needs are so that we can use that to inform resources that we create or to inform topics that we might put out that could benefit healthcare providers and so on and so forth.
And for physicians who are interested in accessing some of your resources or training, how would they go about doing that?
Well, a great way to access our resources and trainings would be to sign up for the Atlas Institute mailing list, since we promote our offerings through our listserv, and physicians that are interested in doing that can visit our website and sign up for those updates. They can also follow us on social media. So we do exist on LinkedIn and on Twitter and on Facebook, and those are some primary sources of keeping current with what Atlas has to offer.
Could you describe what other organizations may exist to support physicians, veterans, or military family members?
Certainly, I'd be happy to highlight a few organizations and supports that are available to veterans and families and would be helpful for physicians to be aware of. So one I can highlight is the Medivie Blue Cross service providers. So veterans who qualify for treatment benefits program from Veterans Affairs Canada can find a mental health care provider in the community who's registered with Medivie Blue Cross. An approved provider who's registered through Medivie Blue Cross can bill Veterans Affairs Canada directly so that veterans don't need to pay out of pocket for their mental health treatment benefits. And veterans can actually search for providers in their community through their online search function or the Medivie Blue Cross mobile app. In addition to Medivie Blue Cross, there are a number of support programs that exist that include things like military family services. They provide services that enhance family resilience and stabilization in the face of military challenges. There's also Operational Stress Injury Social Support Program, which is a peer support network for CAF members, veterans, and their families experiencing an operational stress injury. Wounded Warriors Canada, they're a national organization that's focused on helping ill and injured veterans and first responders and their families to cope with PTSD through a variety of programs. We also have Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group, which supports the transition from active duty to post-military life. They also provide personal administrative support and programs to military members. There's the Veterans Task Force here in Ottawa, where I'm calling in from, and they help organizations in the community and the veteran support ecosystem to connect with one another in relation to access to affordable housing and second career and access to health services to veterans. There's also Together All, which is part of the military sexual trauma peer support model that I know Ruth Stanley-Aikens is speaking to, and that's an online peer support discussion platform for military members and veterans who experience sexual misconduct as well as their families, and that's been launched by the Sexual Misconduct Response Center at D&D and Veterans Affairs Canada, again as part of their military sexual trauma peer support program. There's also the Legion's Service Officer Network, which consists of volunteer branch service officers and professional command service officers who serve as a point of contact for many veterans and their families. They can provide information and advice on a number of Veterans Affairs Canada processes, including all stages of a disability claim process. And Veterans Transition Network, or VTN, they're a national Canadian charity that delivers programs to help veterans transition from military to meaningful civilian life. They deliver mental health services specifically for veterans from coast to coast to coast. And Vets Canada, which is a federally registered nonprofit charity with hundreds of volunteers across the country, most of whom are former serving military or RCMP members.
That's a very extensive list of supports for veterans that I suspect many family physicians are unaware of. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
For physicians, if you are looking to have a handy one-stop shop available of resources that you can provide to veterans and families and also get information that could be relevant to you in your practice, you can go to atlasveterans.ca. You'll actually see at the top of our home bar, there's a resources tab, and within that, you'll notice we have a directory of services, and that's a great way to find information about crisis and emergency services, peer support, counseling, and educational tools intended for veterans veterans and their families in non-life-threatening situations. So that could be a great resource that you could pass along to veteran and family clients. You'll also see our Knowledge Hub tab, and with that, you have the ability to search our library of resources, including fact sheets, research reports, videos, guides, web pages, and more. And these are those resources that are produced by Atlas, as well as many of our partners that are directed for veterans, families, healthcare providers, and researchers as well. So I would recommend that. You could easily bookmark it and have quick access to information that's helpful to you and your patients.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us, MaryAnn, and thank you for all of the wonderful work that Atlas does in supporting soldiers, veterans, and their families.
Well, thank you so much again for having me.
Hi, I'm Ruth Stanley-Aikens. I'm a special advisor to the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, and I worked for many years in health services as a trauma psychotherapist, social worker, and I also ran mental health services for a short time prior to my retirement, and I've been with the Sexual Misconduct Response Center for about 6 years, helping them to move forward projects, understand trauma, and do some work around trauma-informed practices.
Ruth, could you just explain to me what the role of the Sexual Misconduct Response Center is?
Sure, I'd love to. We were established in 2015, so some veterans and some veteran physicians might not be aware of what we have to offer. Essentially, we were stood up to provide support and options to people with lived experience of sexual misconduct, also known as military sexual trauma. We have trained counselors. We have a 24/7 line available 365 days of the year, and they can provide support at any time. They can be reached at 1-844-750-1648, and that's in one of the slides. We also provide support to service providers like family physicians, particularly if you're caring for veterans who have experienced sexual misconduct. And when we look at the last class action suit, we can tell that, over many, many decades, people have experienced sexual misconduct or military sexual trauma during service. What we can do for physicians is provide them with information on the military context. We can provide them with information on options. We can support them to support the people that they're looking after, their patients. But we can also support family physicians just to have the burden of hearing those difficult stories and understanding what people have gone through and the frustration and the emotions that come with that. And finally, we can actually bridge service. So what we'd like to do is provide support to your patients as you await more formalized services. We have a lot of other pieces to the pie. We have a military liaison team who can provide information about military processes. They can liaise with chains of command. We work very, very closely with them. And just so that you know, people can call our line. They do not have to identify themselves. They can do so anonymously, use an alias. We want this to be as trauma-informed as possible so that people don't feel that they have to worry about the information that they provide to us. Now, we do also have response and support coordination, which is like a case management function that provides ongoing support to people who are a part of our mandate. And those people are available during business hours and can even do things like advocacy. They can accompany people to appointments, whether it's a legal appointment or even a restorative engagement appointment. And of course, we are responsible for the restorative engagement program, which is a part of the CAF D&D class action suit. So we have many things on the go. We have the Together All application, which is a peer support, clinically monitored peer support program. And we have several things we'd like to help you with.
Could you elaborate a bit more on what the restorative engagement program is?
The restorative engagement program is a part of the CAF D&D sexual misconduct class action suit. And people who are class members who've experienced sexual misconduct can opt in their application under the class action to participate in restorative engagement. And what it is, it's a type of engagement that's founded on restorative justice principles, but it's a bit of an innovation in that they don't speak with their harmer, but they do speak with an institutional representative, whether that person's in uniform or is a D&D employee. They have those options to choose. Now, essentially, That conversation is facilitated by a restorative practitioner. It is confidential, and essentially they can decide what they want to say and how they want to say it. It can be direct, it can be indirect. The institutional representative, they're called defense representatives in our program. They can decide to tell them about their sexual misconduct experience. They can provide information on how to improve the CAF and D&D work environments. And essentially it gives them a voice, an opportunity to express their needs and to provide recommendations on culture change.
And you mentioned that there's a particular group who you have a mandate to provide services to. Can you tell me who that group is, what that group looks like?
Certainly. Our mission is to provide services to veterans. Sometimes we call them formerly serving members or former serving members, because some people who have not deployed, they are reluctant to call themselves veterans. We also serve serving members and federal public servants employed by the Department of National Defense, all who have experienced sexual misconduct. But we also support those who support them, like family physicians, chains of command, other service providers, friends and family. In fact, on our 24/7 line, we don't turn anyone away. We have resources across the country to make external referrals to if people are interested in civilian resources, but we also have internal resources that we can expedite referrals to for those who are in uniform.
Can you talk a bit about the profile or whether there is a profile of soldiers who have experienced military sexual trauma?
I want to say very clearly, men and women experience sexual misconduct or military sexual trauma. We know from the 2018 StatCan survey that members under the age of 24 are most at risk. We know that the BIPOC community, the LGBTQ2+ community, and those who've been injured are more at risk. However, we know that sexual misconduct happens throughout the course of someone's military service. Even as people age out, and in the military, you retire at 60 as a rule. Even then, older members, they are still being impinged upon with sexual misconduct behaviors. So I just want to say it's men, it's women, and it's something we all need to be aware of.
Thank you. That's a very important perspective for us to remember as care providers, that anybody can be a victim of military sexual trauma, and not to exclude somebody based on their gender or age or any other variable. As a care provider, as a healthcare professional caring for patients in my practice who have experienced sexual trauma, what sorts of resources are available for me to refer patients to, or how would I refer patients to you?
Call our 24/7 line trained counselors. They are trained specifically in issues of sexual misconduct. They understand military culture. And again, they have access to materials from across the country. We have a fairly extensive library on research done on sexual misconduct or military sexual trauma. There are a number of things that we can provide, including just ongoing support and some compassion.
And certainly that concept of military and veteran culture and cultural sensitivity towards military members and families and veterans is so important. You also touched on the concept of moral injury, and we will be discussing moral injury and sanctuary trauma in much more detail in a subsequent module. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or if you had a message for family physicians who are caring for patients who have experienced military sexual trauma, what would that message be?
My message would be, you're doing an important job. Veterans, former serving members who've experienced sexual misconduct are wonderful people. They are people who keep putting one foot in front of the other. If they need to have some support as you wait for referral to other services, which in the civilian world can take some time, please consider that we can provide that support. And we can also be a sounding board to family physicians who have heard the stories, the truths of people's experiences. They feel the anger and the frustration. We're all human, we're a team, and we have to work together.